Hello there, fellow truth seekers. This is Doug coming to you once again on this here Shabbat. I hope all of you have been well and had a blessed week. Didn't get on here last week. I worked so much up there at that shop that I was just wore slam out. All the hauling and cleaning and everything else just wore me out, and I just rested last week. And I've done the same thing this week up there. Like yesterday, I was out there working in that garage. Because it's full of stuff and trying to get it cleaned up and organized and consolidated. It was just piled up in there, and so I've been working on that. And so it wore me out. That's the reason it's like 6 o'clock now on Shabbat. Just now getting over here to kind of do a little bit of a video, just kind of say what's going on. I wore out. I'm not I'm not old, but I'm 62 and I'm not able to do the stuff I used to do. I can, but it wears me out. It wears me out more than it did when I was younger. And I gotta tone this light. These white lights, man, they really bother my eyes. But anyway, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about the things that are going on around us, and the I keep thinking about Trump, talking about the golden age and the technologies, going to and fro on the earth. But the one thing that I've really come to the conclusion about scriptures is patterns. That it's patterns that repeat, that just keep repeating. And the reason that it is because Satan understands how we are, and he understands how gullible we are and trusting. So he just keeps doing the same thing over and over again. But the real thing about it is that we don't remember stuff. As an example, if we didn't write stuff down or record it, then it wouldn't be that long it would be forgotten. Okay, my generation, I'm a baby boomer, and so my generation was the generation that was born right after the end of World War II. So I'm very familiar, not only with World War II, but World War I to some extent. But the problem is that, I grew up with people that had been in World War II, telling me stories about it and their recollection of it. But then when you read in, the history books or whatever about it, it's a little different. It's a different, narrative, or it's it didn't really happen this way, it happened this way. And so you got, millions of people that fought in these, in these wars and stuff, and they're coming home and they're giving you their take on it. Look, I was at the Battle of the Bulge, or I was on the beach in Normandy. So they can tell you a whole lot better than some historian that's just been going around gathering stories from people, and he kind of takes them all and conglomerates them into one story. And it really may have elements of what really happened, but it's just like when you watch these movies. Some of them are very true to the events, and others just embellish it a lot. It's not really what happened. Like about the movie The Battle of Bulge. A lot of that just didn't happen that way. It just wasn't like that. But that, it's kind of just embellished. Well, when you look at, my recollection of the events that were told to me by my parents and by my grandparents and by people that were actually in there. I had uncles and stuff that were in World War II. And they tell me, well, then I tell my children. But I leave stuff out. I may add something in. I may even add elements from World War I and mix elements of World War I and World War II together. I'm talking about a battle that actually happened in World War I, but I'm attributing it to World War II because I get it kind of mixed up. So I'm telling my kid this, okay, and then they tell their children, and by the time you get 5, 6 generations out, if you didn't have it recorded in some kind of way in books or in film or whatever, they would say, yeah, that was mythology. Did that war even really happen? And so they wouldn't know anything other than what they had been told from one generation to the next. And each time, like I told my child, and I had mixed it up a little bit from what my parents told me. I'd added a little bit and left out a little bit, and I'm telling my kid, and then he adds a little bit and he takes a little bit out. And so by the time it gets out 5, 6, 7 generations, it's a totally different story. It's like that thing about passing it down the line. You tell, you whisper into this person's ear or something, and he whispers it to the next one and the next one and the next one, and by the time it gets to the end, it's not even the same story. Something totally different. Because it gets something, each person leaves something out, or they add something. And so that's the way history is. So the history that we receive is just the history that whoever is in power decides to write the history the way that they want it to read. And so the people that were alive, say in the time of Rome and the Hebrews there in Jerusalem, by the time you get out a few generations, then it's, of course you have people that are historians, people like Tacitus and people like Josephus and others who write this stuff down, but, they're telling it from their viewpoint and from their worldview, and so they're going to kind of tend to do the same thing. They're going to, even though they're writing this stuff down, they're telling it from their point of view, from their worldview. And so the way they record it may be different from, the way Josephus records it is going to be different from the way Tacitus recorded it. But they're going to kind of confirm each other because they're going to be talking about the same stories, and a lot of what they say is going to match. So you can kind of say, well, maybe they are, maybe this did happen. Maybe it did happen that way. But again, the timeline of everything has been distorted. And of course, when you look in Scripture, it even talks about that in Daniel, about how this willful king, and how these people, they decide that they're going to rewrite the change the times and traditions and customs and all that stuff and laws, calendars. I mean, they've done all that, but it's happened in our time, in this time. Even though these people are trying to make it like that this stuff happened, these things happened a long time ago, they didn't. One of the things, and I mentioned this before in one of my, I think maybe not the last video, but one before that, I might have mentioned it, about how the first recorded volcano was Mount Vesuvius erupting and destroying all the people there in Pompeii and Herculaneum. And then where it talks about there in Matthew 24 about the sun being blocked out and the sun, the moon turning to blood and the sun turning black, sackcloth. Well, in 536 AD, and of course this again is an added this timeline's been added, and they've broken these events up across that timeline that they actually added. These are all events that really happened in the first century, but they made it look like they happened in different times. It's supposedly in 536 AD was the worst year for disasters in recorded history, according to the historians and stuff. Well, if you listen to the things that it say happened in 536, there were volcanoes, earthquakes, the sun didn't shine for 18 months. There was famine, pestilence. I mean, there was all this stuff that's described there in Matthew chapter 24. But in reality, it didn't happen in 536 AD. It happened in the first century. Because that guy Gunnar Heinsohn that I mentioned about, and you can go look this stuff up. I mean, I encourage you to. I mean, he was secular. He wasn't a Christian or anything. He was just a scientist that, he had been looking at the chronology that they were laying out, and he says it does not add up. It doesn't match what we see in the archaeological record. In other words, this is the first century. Then the second century, and the third century, and the fourth century, fifth century, on and on. There should be stuff, this is the archaeology in the strata or in the layer of earth of the first century. So there should be things from the, up here from the second century, and then up here the third century, because the stuff accumulates, and it's, the layers of the earth add, build up. And you should have the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth centuries on top of the stuff from the first century. But that's not what he found. What he found is from the first to the ninth century was all on the same archaeological plane. And so he come to the conclusion that 800 years had been added to the calendar. And of course that would, that would go to prove why they did that, was to account for, to get rid of the millennial kingdom and all the events of the first century, that all the things that happened in the first century, they didn't want people to see that all these things all happened in the same period of time. These volcanoes, and these volcanoes was going off everywhere, all over the world. Like over there in Russia, they got them what they call them shield volcanoes. There's a lava field that just goes for like 1 million square miles around that area. And over here in the U.S., all up and down the West Coast, and along the continental divide of the United States, because I've been up on some of those, like the Bandera volcano. I went all the way up to the top. It's supposedly extinct or whatever, but I went up on it and looked down in there in the crater, and it's filled in, but and from up on top of it you could see there was a field, just as far as you could see, of volcano, these stratovolcanoes, cones or whatever. They were all over the place there. And then of course you got the granddaddy there in Wyoming, the caldera, the Yellowstone, and then there's one down there in California. There's a caldera down there too that you don't hear that much about, but it's even more dangerous than the one there in Yellowstone. But you had these going off all over the world at the same time. But it's it's funny to me, because I've tried to look it up, and I don't see anywhere where it's recorded that there was a volcano before 69, which would match what he says there in Matthew 24, that there's not been a time like this since the beginning. That all flesh would be destroyed if the days wasn't shortened. And that's why. Because this stuff was going on all over the world. It was being unleashed. And it darkened the skies up. It blackened out the sky, blackened out the sun, and to the point where nothing would grow. All the crops failed. So people were starving. There was famine everywhere. And this was worldwide. all over the earth. It's not just over there in the Middle East and Europe and all that. No. And the thing that kind of, has really solidified my coming to, accept this as being true is the architecture. It's all over the world. I mean, here in the United States, it's everywhere, and they've destroyed a lot of it. And they used, here in the United States, they used all these fires and wars, like the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. They were meant to destroy these old world structures. I mean, like up there in the New England, up in there, I've seen like some of these old paintings and stuff of up there. I mean, there was a lot of buildings. If there was no more people here than what they claim, the settlers or whatever, then how did they have time to build, to build all that? I mean, all that brick and stuff, where did they get it? Where's the brick, kilns? Where's all, all this stuff coming from? I mean, they, like Salem and Boston, I mean, they was just buildings, I mean, just rows and rows and rows of buildings. Big buildings. Where did they come from? I mean, and but then you see these depictions of people living in these straw, these log cabins and stuff. Well, if you got the ability to build all these, massive brick buildings and stuff, why are you living in a, log cabin? If you have access to brickworks and glassworks, I mean, these all had, big, multi-pane windows in them and stuff. And so, and a lot of them structures got, in the so-called revolution and all that stuff, got wiped out, got burned up. Because they had to get rid of it. And it's the same way with the insane asylums, the orphanages, and all this stuff was in, starting, and I'm beginning to believe that 1776 was sort of was that when Hasatan was released? Or was he released right before that? And that was the period when they began to implement his plan. In the video I done about that, I mean, what would you, how would you plan your release? What you were going to do? And so, I believe he was kind of released a little bit before that. I mean, I've seen other people's, that guy Jack, or Jason Jack, I think is what his name is. Anyway, I mean, he makes a lot of good arguments and stuff. But he seems to think that 1776 was when he was released. I kind of tend to think it might have been a little bit before that, and that he had gotten his people that were going to be the controllers, the Khazars, the Ashkenaz, that he was going to be working with, and taught them and instructed them on what they were to do. And then 1776 was the start date of it. That's when they began implementing the plan. Because you see, a corresponding reset or change all over the earth. I mean, these revolutions everywhere, and the destruction of cities, and the destruction of these structures. I mean, that was sort of like the beginning of it. And the thing is, again, because of the way our memories are, I can't pass my memories to my kids. I can only tell them from my own recollection events that happened before them. That my parents told me, their parents told them. I can only recollect it, and according to the Native Americans, their way of doing it is that they have a storyteller. And the new storyteller, that he trains, is somebody that is kind of like got a gift for remembering these stories. And the storyteller, the older, the master storyteller, he tells this guy these stories over and over and over and over and over again. And so he don't lose bits and pieces or add bits and pieces, he just, and so, but even at that, I would say that over time, there's still little pieces that get lost and something added. It's just the way the human mind is, it's going to be. It's just no way around it. I mean, they may keep it fairly intact, but they still, I believe, going to be little things lost here and there. Well, like the analogy I gave a while ago about me telling my kid and him telling his kid and him telling his kid, and you get out 6, 7 generations, they don't even believe that it ever happened. They believe it's mythology. And then until they go on the internet or go into a history book or something, and then they read about it. But it's not real for them. And it's not even for me, living that close to it and having relatives that were in World War II and in World War I and all that, it begins to lose its, connection to me as well. I mean, over time, the more distant you get from the event, then the more, that it loses its relevance. And so that's just the way that we are, because we live short lives. Of course, it would be different if we lived longer or were immortal, but we're not. And so, just from that example alone, you think about all of our history. That's why so much of it's been relegated to being called mythology, is because they want to say, well, these people just embellished it. They're not really telling the real history. They just telling, it's a metaphor for something else. Same thing they do with the scriptures, that it's all metaphors and similes and similitudes and stuff and figures of speech. It's not real. It didn't really happen. And it's the same with the, secular history. I mean, what we call secular history, or the history of like Egypt and Assyria and all that stuff is been so convoluted and covered up. Now we're finding out that they're discovering over there in Egypt, they've, using ground penetrating radar and LiDAR and all that stuff over there, they're finding out there's like a whole city under that area over there. Because it was buried and all, like in the mud flood or whatever it was. Because that's the other thing that gets me is I've seen, pictures, photographic pictures, and of course they were photoshopping stuff back then too. I mean, we don't think they didn't have that ability. They did. They photoshopped pictures and stuff. But I've seen pictures that they looked pretty authentic over there in Egypt, and this is like in the late like the 1890s, early 1900s, of them finding the Sphinx over there in Egypt, and it was just the head sticking up out of the sand. The body wasn't even uncovered. And the pyramids that they say that them pyramids were, had been covered up, way up the sides of the pyramids, and just over time it kind of, the wind blowing the sand and erosion and stuff, kind of began to wash away, and people began to see these pyramids, that they were buried. And, okay, well, was it the mud flood that did it? Or was it just the Great Flood? Because if Egypt was a civilization all this time, you would think they would have not let them structures get buried like that if they built them. I don't believe they did. I believe they were pre-flood. But there's a lot of different arguments about that, and I mean, and again, none of us can go back and prove one way or the other whether it is or not. But the point I want to make is that this repeating pattern, starting before the flood with Atlantis, the 10 kings of Atlantis, and the power over them, which was supposedly Poseidon, and that he had 10 sons, and they were these 10 kings. And you read about 10 kings in here, and the occultic, esoteric tradition that in Atlantis, that the period before the flood was the golden age, and then the period after the silver age, and then we went through a bronze age, and then an iron age, and then now we're coming back to a golden age again. That this is a repeating cycle or pattern. But when you look at scriptures, you can see that it is in there too, and a lot of the scriptures that I've come to realize that they have multiple applications that for periods of time, like they're dual prophecies. There's a prophecy for the time, and like here in Daniel. And this is one of the things I've kind of come to realize about this, is that people tend, this is in Daniel chapter 2, and this is when Daniel is interpreting this, not only does he tell King Nebuchadnezzar what the vision was that he had, the dream, but he tells him what the meaning of it is. And of course, he describes this statue with a gold head of gold, and the breast and arms of silver, and the midriff of bronze, and thighs of bronze, and then the legs of iron, and then the feet of iron mixed with clay. 10 toes with iron mixed with clay. The 2 legs represented the Roman Empire at the time when Yahushua was here. Okay. Because the head of gold was the Babylonian Empire, the bronze was the silver was the Medo-Persian, and it was the breast of silver and the arms of silver. Okay, and I've talked about how the Medo-Persians was a co-regency. They had 2 rulers. They had a ruler of the Persians and the ruler of the Medes, but they were a single unified empire. And then you had the Bronze Age, the Greeks, and then you had the Iron Age, the Romans, the 2 legs of iron. Okay, now the 2 legs of iron was the Roman Empire, and I believe I've become convinced that they were worldwide. They were not just over there in Europe, in the Middle East, in the Near East, and a little part of North Africa. I believe they were everywhere. And they were more powerful and more advanced than what we've been led to believe. Again, these people, the controllers, under the direction of Hasatan, they wanted to write a history that, that downplayed their development. Is to always keep making us think that we are at the pinnacle of development. That, none of this stuff that we're doing now ever existed in the past. When really, when you look at scriptures, we find that, yeah, it did. I mean, like I said, there in Babel, when he comes down, he says that he saw that they were of one language, and that nothing that they imagined to do would be withheld from them, restrained from them. Nothing. Okay, so, they were moving, and they were way more advanced than what we have been led to believe. Okay, and then the same thing before the flood. If you read in the extra biblical text of Enoch, he tells us in there that they were teaching, these fallen ones was teaching them all this forbidden knowledge. They were teaching them how to do metallurgy, pharmakia, how to make chemicals. How they, and in Jasher and Jubilees, it talks I think mainly in Jasher, but I think in Jubilees too, it talks about how they were teaching man the mixing of animals and humans and animals. So they were teaching them genetics. And that's why when I keep hearing this golden age from people like Trump and others that are in his administration, they're comparing it to that golden age, the occultic, esoteric golden age of Atlantis with the 10 kings, and which is different than the tribulation. Okay, and the other thing, this is another point that people don't get either, is they, when it talks about 7 hills and all that stuff, they say, oh, that's Rome. Well, yeah, Rome is on 7 hills, but Israel, Jerusalem is on 7 hills too. Do you know Washington, D.C. is on 7 hills? A lot of people don't know that. I'm just saying. So you could say, well, it's this place, or it's this place, or this place. I mean, we don't know which one. But what we do know is that when you read there in Matthew 24, or in Revelation 17, it says the ones who shed the blood of the saints and killed the prophets and stuff. Well, who was that? It wasn't Rome. That was the Hebrews. They killed the prophets. Okay, and they killed the saints. What was Paul doing? I mean, he was going all over with warrants, gathering these people up. I mean, he was going to Damascus. That wasn't Israel. That was another country. But he was going there to gather up these Christians and take them back. And they would have killed them. But then, whenever they began to be occupied, fully occupied by Rome, because early on, like when Yahushua was here and even earlier, Rome didn't have a whole lot of soldiers there. They had like a garrison or whatever there to maintain peace and order. Because, later on in 70 AD, they brought legions down there to go up against Jerusalem. And it wasn't just them. We know now that a lot of those legions were made up of people from the Middle East, Germanic people. They were made up from a whole lot of different peoples. And then when you see now the evidence of these buildings everywhere, all the way, these Greco-Roman buildings all the way over to Beijing, China, or Peking, it used to be called Peking, I think. And over here in the Americas and down in South America, all over the Middle East. And these wars, these bankers' wars, they're the controllers. I mean, so they call them bankers' wars. Well, their objective is, it's a multifaceted objective when they do this. One is they don't want people to discover their Ponzi schemes, using fiat money to accumulate stuff with fake money and using it to buy up real assets like gold and silver and property and businesses and stuff like that. They don't want people to understand that that's what they're doing. They're issuing this fake money that ain't backed up with nothing. They getting paid interest on it. They loan this money to banks, to commercial banks and stuff. They loan that money to them. They get back interest on it, and huge amounts of interest. Because we're not talking little sums of money here. We're talking huge sums of money. So just a little bit of interest, 3 or 4% would if you're loaning out $500 billion to a government, and at 3% or 4% or whatever, these treasury bonds and stuff, then 3 or 4% on $500 billion, that's a lot of money. I mean, it's like here in the United States now, our interest alone on our debt is $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion. And unless they get it under control and begin to bring it down, of course, it's going to eventually, it'll surpass our revenue, what we're taking in taxes or whatever. So, and then they're using that money, that interest money, fake money. They use it to buy up real stuff, to buy up property, hard assets, gold, silver, mines, big corporations, farms, big ag, all these are all owned and controlled. The big stuff is all owned and controlled by them. And it's been done using our money. They take our money from us under threat of being put in jail or even being killed. The IRS and different ones that are taking our money and giving it to them, giving it to this banking cartel. And so every so often they'll have a war because people begin to get wise and they understand what's going on. And so they start these wars, and of course there's economic collapse whenever that happens. And they say, well, it was the war that caused the economic collapse. It wasn't our pyramid scheme that was falling apart, and so but at the same time they can also destroy a lot of these old world structures. I mean, look at Dresden, Germany. If you could see some of the pictures of Dresden before World War II and then after, I mean, it was full of these old world buildings. I mean, they were massive, incredible structures all over Dresden. And after World War II, it had been leveled. There wasn't none of them left. And everywhere, I mean, they just done, and of course, there were certain buildings that they allowed to stay that they wanted to keep and repurpose and use, and they created narratives around them. And of course, this one guy I was listening to, that my lunch break guy, he says he believes that they're using AI. They were using some type of AI, and again, I've talked about that there's nothing new under the sun. Anything you can imagine, technology-wise or anything else, it's already been done. And so when Hasatan's released, he says, hey, just like he did with the people in, Nimrod at Babel, the technology and the knowledge from before the flood, I think they probably went to caves or these like pyramid structures like that, these real durable structures. And they put these copper tablets or gold tablets or emerald tablets or whatever. They put some kind of knowledge, this information on these things about how to do stuff, how to build these structures, how to build weapons, how to build, how to make chimeras, how to do all this stuff. They buried it or put it away knowing the flood was coming. They were storing this stuff, in underground systems or whatever, archives. And so whenever the controllers got control, and that's the reason even right now, the Smithsonian and the Vatican, whenever they hear of a discovery anywhere, they swoop in there and try to take control of it and shut it down, to the public. Just like over there in Göbekli Tepe, the government over there in Turkey shut down. There was a German scientist, archaeologist that had been over there for like 20 years excavating that site, and he'd only excavated like 5% of it, because they had done ground penetrating radar and mapped out the whole area, but they haven't excavated it. And they stopped them. They said, that's it. We're going to leave some for future generations to excavate. Doesn't make sense. But that's what they did. Well, it's because the powers that be, the controllers and the ones that, this will reveal too much about the past. And we don't want that discovered. Because now people are beginning to ask questions and stuff. As where, if it was 75 years ago, 100 years ago, and they discovered it, they would have excavated the whole thing, and then they would have wrote a narrative around it and published it, and then, taught it in school, and then that would have been it. People wouldn't have questioned it. But now everybody is beginning to question these structures, the narrative, the historical timeline. They're questioning and asking questions about it. And you're seeing it more and more and more, this awakening, people being awakened that there's something that the narrative that we've been told don't match up with what we see. And so we're seeing it firsthand. And I just wanted to point out a few scriptures here. I mean, like here, this statue in Daniel chapter 2, and I'm at verse 38, and I'm going to read down through verse 41. They always try to imply that like this fourth kingdom is also the toes and the feet. I don't think it is. I think the feet are a fifth kingdom. The four kingdoms are the kingdoms that are in existence up to the final destruction of Israel. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. That was it. This fifth kingdom is the last one. Before the judgment. Before the great white throne judgment. And the new heaven and new earth and all that. This fifth one is what we're witnessing now coming to power, coming to fruition. It says here in verse 30, it says, "And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thy hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold." So he was this first kingdom. Okay. And it says, "And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee." That's the kingdom of silver, the Medo-Persian kingdom. That's the second. And then it says, "And another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth." That was the Greeks. Over all the earth. See what I'm saying? Over all the earth. All right. And then the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Okay. So that's the fourth kingdom, the two legs of iron. That they were over all the earth. Just like the Greeks had ruled over all the earth. All right. And then it says in verse 41, "And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided." And of course the original Roman Empire was. It was the eastern and the western kingdoms, part of it. But they were still a co-regency. They had two emperors and all that, but it was so large and so unmanageable that it could not just be ruled from Rome. They had two different places to rule. Byzantium in the east, Rome in the west, but they ruled over the entire world. Okay, but now the difference is, it says, and the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron. In other words, this final kingdom has elements of that Roman Empire in it, the strength of it. It says, "For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another." Well, that's this mixing of Hasatan and the fallen ones with humans. The Nephilim, but it's, or hybrids. And they've been doing that all along since their release. They've been mingling with humans. And of course, you hear stories of UFOs and abductions and stuff. And supposedly our government and other governments making a deal with these entities to allow them to take so many humans and do stuff with them. Breeders. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I know it's a lot of people around the world saying the same thing. But anyway, it says that, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. So who are the they? Who are the they that are mingling with the seed of men? It's not men. I mean, the seed of men mingling with the seed of men. No, it's something else that's mingling with humans. It says, but they shall not cleave one to another. In other words, they won't have a love for one another. Even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the Elohim of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And that's the stone cut without hands that comes down and it's, but this is the last kingdom. This is not the time there when the destruction of Jerusalem, which would have been the tribulation period that you read about in Matthew 24. I mean, because, you can look here at what it says here, because this is the thing that kind of convinced me about this. It says, he is talking to them. He's speaking to his disciples. So this chapter is written to them. All right? It's written for us, but it's not written to us. It's not written to me individually, directly. It's written for me. As Paul says, it's written for our teaching and correction and instruction in righteousness. That's what it's written for. But for them, the disciples, it says, and this is chapter 24, Matthew, beginning at verse 1, and Yahushua went out and departed from the temple, and this is the last time he went into the temple. He never went in there again. And he went out from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Yahushua said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's what happened in 70 AD. It was destroyed. All right. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world, or the end of the age? And Yahushua answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come, saying, I'm Christ. And there were a lot of deceivers back then. Paul talks about it. Peter talked about it. And about nation rising up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And then over here in verse 34, it says, or in verse 33, it says, so likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation, he's talking about the generation right then, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. He ain't talking about us, some future generation. He's talking about that generation right then and there. And this will kind of confirm this. This is in chapter 26. This is him. This is after they've done took him. Judas has portrayed him. They take him down to Caiaphas' house. First off, they're breaking their own law. They were not supposed to take him over to Caiaphas' house and set up a trial there. He was supposed to be taken to the temple and having a trial there, not at Caiaphas' house. That was, and then not only that, Caiaphas rent his garments, and that was the no-no. They weren't supposed, the priest wasn't supposed to do that. All right, here, let's see, verse 57 in Matthew 26. And they that had laid hold on Yahushua led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. And Peter followed from afar off unto the high priest's palace, and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Yahushua to put him to death, but found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none at the last, and at the last came 2 false witnesses, and said, This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of Elohim and to build it in 3 days. Of course, he was talking about his bodies, the temple of his body. And the high priest arose and said unto him, Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? But Yahushua held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living Elohim that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of Elohim. Yahushua said unto him, Thou hast said. Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Now he's telling Caiaphas that he will see this. So Caiaphas is still alive too after supposedly 2,000 years, or really about 1,400 years. That he's still alive to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. No. He lived to 70 A.D. and the destruction of Jerusalem and the return of Yahushua, and he saw it. He saw him coming down out of heaven with great, sitting at the right hand of the Father. I mean, it opened up. And he looked up there and saw the glory of the Most High, and Yahushua sitting next to him on the throne. And, all the times I've read this, I mean, there ain't no telling how. I couldn't probably count how many times I've read these scriptures. And it just never dawned on me. I mean, I'd always been convinced that, again, from the religious system, that somehow or another John's still alive, because where Christ said, what is it to you if he lives until I return? So I'm just thinking, he's, 2,000 years, No. Because most of the Talmudim, the disciples, they didn't live to see the return of Yahushua. They were resurrected. And there was a judgment then. There was a judgment back then. There was a judgment against all those people that came up against him. But there was also a judgment of those who had been his faithful. And they were, appointed over cities and over kingdom, over nations. Because the nations as they had been didn't exist anymore. They had been, defeated. The Roman Empire had been defeated. And all the nations that were in alignment with them. That was what the kingdoms against kingdoms and all that stuff. That was the conquering of these peoples by the Romans. They were conquering everybody, and they was people in league with them, helping them. But I believe that those 10 the 10 kings it talks about in the scripture is this last. I think we're seeing that happen, and it could have been happening back then too. I don't know, but I think that there's this pattern of repeating the same scenarios over and over again that Satan follows because it works. He's able to capture a lot of people and convince them to follow him, and we see it happening. But we also see where I see these trade agreements going on, and I've also seen a map, and I don't know, supposedly it's the United Nations map of 10 regions, that they have divided the earth into 10 regions, and they're going to have these 10 rulers over them, and then one supreme ruler or whatever, which would be just like what we see in mythology about Atlantis how it had 10 kings and one supreme ruler over them. You know, Poseidon ruling over his 10 sons, you know, that were 10 kings. You know, Nephilim kings or whatever. And that seems to be where we're headed now. I mean, we seem to be headed in that same direction again. And you know, and when you read some of the stuff from people like Manly P. Hall, you know, the Freemasons and all, that's what they've been saying they want to do, is they want to, you know, establish a new Atlantis. You know, the rebirth of Atlantis. And that here, the United States, it would be the launching point of it. And then you got Trump saying, you know, the golden age and all that stuff. And of course, back then they had their, you know, a unification in the golden age. The Atlantis and all that had a unification of government, you know, the church or religion and state coming together. And that's kind of where we see. And then now you got this new pope, first one ever from the United States. Does all these things have significance? That we're seeing this rise of it, you know, of a new Atlantis. You know, you know, when you look at this plan that Trump has been implementing of tariffing these governments, you know, these countries everywhere, and, you know, bringing them to heel. Even, you know, even though you got, you know, like China over there barking and, you know, fighting back and all that, they ain't, you know, they ain't doing too good. I mean, they're not doing too good over there at all. And then all of that, I'm hearing now, of course, again, you know, the Chinese Communist Party, they just put out what they want you to believe. You know, they're saying that they got 1.4, 1.5 billion people, but there's a lot of other people, you know, some authoritative, that are saying that they don't have nowhere near that many people, that they got somewhere between 3 and 800 million people. They've killed a lot of their people. And it may even be part of this, you know, the culling, you know, that they've been trying to implement, you know, the elite that want their utopia, and they want to get rid of excess people. But I think that aspect of it has been thwarted. That, you know, that there's one faction that don't want that, and one faction that does. And I think we're coming to that point. Like I said, the right hand and the left hand are battling it out to see who has supremacy. And of course, it's looking like the left-hand path is being crushed. I mean, they're getting more insane and more desperate all the time. I mean, you see the stuff they're doing. I mean, like, you know, burning Tesla, you know, showrooms and attacking people driving Teslas, and I mean, just insane stuff. You know, that's them lashing out. I mean, you know, why would you lash out against somebody driving a car that don't have anything to do with Tesla or Elon Musk? I mean, nothing. But that's the way, you know, that side, or, you know, that when it's, you know, like in its death throes, it's lashing out at anything and everything, and it gets more extreme. I mean, and you know, there's a lot of commentators, I mean, political commentators that are saying that they believe that they're in their you know, the Democrat Party or whatever, the left is in its death throes, because it is going more and more radical towards the communist socialist left, getting further and further in it, even as everybody else is moving further and further away from them. You know, even their own constituencies are getting away from them. A lot of the people that, you know, have been big voices for them in the media, you know, Chris Cuomo and Bill Maher and others that are big voices been for the Democrat Party. Even their main, strategist, James Carville, is saying they've just gone completely loopy, and that they need to go and form their own party and leave the Democrat Party alone. But they're not going to do that. He's talking about these people like Ilhan Omar and Ocasio-Cortez and Hakeem Jeffries and others that are just way off the deep end radical. That want full-blown communism. And of course, the majority of the people, are going away from that. They don't want communism. They want freedom and all that. But that's the other aspect of it is that, the preamble to the wording like of the Declaration of Independence and all. I can't word it right. I should have got a copy of it. I've got a book, I think, there at the store down there. I think I got a book that has the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all that, and it may even have the Declaration of Independence in it. But it says that they basically, got the blessing of Elohim to be freed from the rulership of Yahushua. Or they said the British, the King of Britain. But the way this worded and all, we've been, blessed. How is it written? Anyway, he blessed their endeavor. And their endeavor was to be freed from being ruled by this king. Now, everybody says it's King George, but a lot of people say that and I kind of tend to believe it. That ain't who they was wanting to be freed from. They were wanting to be freed from Yahushua. The King of Kings. And so that declaration and his, the Most High saying, okay, you're free. He blessed it and let them go their own way. And of course, and they made up for the time of during the millennial kingdom, where there was peace and prosperity and no war. Well, they've made up for their lost time, because we've been in some kind of conflict or war ever since the U.S. has been a nation. And of course, the nations began to form again all over the earth. And of course, Yahushua, and because too, the New Jerusalem had already been built. When he left, when he ascended, he went up and they were building it, constructing it, and then whenever he came back, because what did he tell his Talmudim? He says, I go away to prepare a place that where I am you may be also. Well, he was preparing that place, and when he come back, and set up his kingdom, he come back with that city. And I believe it was here. And it was, and it was visible. And then whenever the end of the millennium came, wherever it was setting up at, I believe it was at the North Pole. I believe it was, that's where it gets its power and energy from, is from the magnetic North Pole. And now it's cloaked. And in there in Revelation 20, it says that the Gog and Magog come up against the camp of the saints in the holy city. Well, everybody thinks that's Jerusalem over there. And I don't. I believe that was just a, smoke and mirrors kind of thing, to lead people to believe that these are the Hebrew people, and they're not. Now, whether there was actually some Hebrew people that managed to survive and go into the millennial kingdom, but that had not been converted, I don't know. They may have been. But I believe Elohim was done with them. That was it, because they rejected his son and killed him. And there's a parable that he gives about that, about where he lends out. It's a parable where he lets out this vineyard, and then he sends servants to go and collect his, cut. What he's supposed to, what he's agreed with them. This is what you give me whenever the harvest is here. And they beat him up and throwed him out and told him to, get beat sand. Then he sends another one. And then finally he says, I'll send my son. Surely they will honor him and receive him. And they didn't. They killed him. Said, let us, he's the inheritor. Let's kill him and take his inheritance. And it says that king was wroth. He was wroth. And he sent his armies to destroy them. I mean, it can't get any clearer than that. Because they didn't recognize the time of their visitation. The Homoedim, that's what it's telling them. That there's these visitations and stuff that they're going to have. These events that they're going to have. And they need to be watching for them and prepared for them. And they didn't. They rejected him and they killed him. Not just him. I mean, the Romans, were the ones that decreed to put him to death. But it was only because of the Hebrew people, agitating them to do it. And again, the Romans was just, they just wanted to keep peace and keep things stable and peaceful. You do pretty much what you want, just, do it peaceably. And so they got what they wanted. They and of course, he sent his armies, his heavenly armies, to destroy them. And the Romans and, the ones that were there at Jerusalem, that were destroying Jerusalem and really destroying the earth. I mean, they were warring everywhere. And they all came and gathered up down there, and so he destroyed them and then judged them. And so that was the end of it, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that was the end of the Hebrew people and the nation of Israel. They were left desolate. And of course now those feet mixed, with iron and miry clay, it has remnants. I mean, like here in the United States, I mean, you look around, and this is something too. This guy, this JT, follows JC, and I don't go along with everything that they say on there. I mean, some of it I don't really agree with, but I mean, this kind of it just kind of put me to thinking, because I'd seen this. He went down to the Capitol there in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I've been in there. I mean, it's right there. It's easy to get, go in anytime you want. I went up there and went in it and I'd seen this statue there of George Washington dressed as a Roman. And and I'm thinking, why? Why would this colonial president be being depicted as a Roman all over the place? And I mean, when you look at, the pictures that they show you, that they've put in the history books and all that, show him, wearing colonial garb, the stockings and the powdered wigs and all that kind of stuff. But you see these statues and stuff all over the place of George Washington. He's depicted as a Roman or as the god Zeus. There in Washington, D.C., there's him sitting on a throne, George Washington sitting on a throne with, I believe it's Mars sitting next to him or standing next to him. And it's the throne of Zeus. And then inside the Capitol, up there up in the dome, you look up in there, it's called the apotheosis of Washington. He's sitting on the throne of Zeus. And he's got all these other gods around him, Minerva and Vulcan and Hercules and or Mercury, Mars, and different ones all around him up there, and it's called the apostasy. In other words, being made into a god. But it's really, I believe, it's really Zeus, and that they are just depicting George Washington as this, but really he didn't look nothing like that. He looked something else. But how do we know? We don't. And I mean, it's the same thing too. I mean, George Washington was not the first president. There was a bunch of them before him. There was like 14, I think, before George Washington. He was only the president. He became the president after they had ratified the Constitution. But before that, I think, and they served 1 year. And it was like from 1776 to 1789, which is when the Constitution was, ratified. There was a different president each year up until then. So, I mean, but then once he was made into it, he was made into, to look like this Zeus. And he, like I say, that statue down there and that Capitol building down there, I believe is the Old World. I believe it's the Old World building. And that statue in there is from that period. And they just, depict him in the books and, that he looked like that, but really he didn't look like that at all. And so, this kind of stuff is kind of coming out, coming to light and all that. I encourage everybody to kind of just dig into it, pray over it, and I do. I mean, I pray to have, wisdom and knowledge, understanding and discernment about all this stuff. Because it's getting really interesting. Like the old Chinese philosopher said, may you live in interesting times. Well, we're living in some interesting times. And the mad rush for this AI and, to have this golden age, of prosperity. And, I can say, I mean, at least it's, it's probably all part of a deception, but I mean, Trump's doing what he said he's going to do. I will have to admit, that he does do what he says, but is it all part of a greater deception? That is meant to take us off our guard and begin to, because they've already, like I said, he's already secured a commitment for $8 trillion in investments in manufacturing and production facilities here in the United States, and more being announced all the time. I mean, you're getting ready. It's going to take, a little time for it to kind of roll out, but I think you're going to see the biggest boom that this country has ever seen. A new golden age. And he likens himself to like Thomas Jefferson, or not Thomas Jefferson, but Andrew Jackson. I believe gold is going to become real, the gold and silver, but gold particularly is going to come to be the money again, or the backing for money again. Because everybody's gathering it up, that's for sure. The federal, these reserve central banks, the Chinese, the Indians, and then you got them too. Now them and Pakistan over there, two nuclear powers. I mean, and it's already coming out that MI6 and the CIA are the ones that's stirring it up, and they're part of the banking cartel. Most people don't know that these, the Central Intelligence Agency is, really independent of the government. And, it's the only agency that really doesn't have any department over them. Like if you look at the FBI, the Department of Justice is over them. If you look at, the NSA or anybody like that, then the National Intelligence Agency is under, the Secretary of State or some, the Department of State or whatever. I mean, it's, they all under a department of some kind, but the CIA isn't. It's under the banking cartel. And so is MI6. The central bank. They're all together. And it's their way, the central banks, the international banking settlements, the banking cartel, that's how they get their intelligence. That's how they know what's going on, and that's how they instigate wars and stuff, is using them to go and start revolutions, color revolutions and all that kind of stuff. That's how they operate. And it's how they get their intel. They how they want to know what's going on there, in Trump's cabinet and cabinets over in the European Union or in Russia or China or whatever. They got eyes and ears all over the place, listening and feeding information. They ain't necessarily feeding it to our government. They're feeding it to them people, the controllers. They're there. It was created for their purposes. And so. These people that want to reduce the population and all that stuff, I guess we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. But, you probably ought to read, some of these scriptures and stuff to see what I'm talking about, as far as you can look through there, and there's other scriptures too that really indicate that the tribulation and the millennial kingdom, that stuff's already done happened, and that now we're in this little season and we're coming to the end of it. And I think everything they're doing is preparing the world to go up against the camp of the saints in the holy city. And that's why the fixation, I believe, is such a fixation on the Arctic. As before, there wasn't that big a fixation by us or the Russians or the Chinese or anybody on that area up there. But now there's this huge fixation with us, talking about making Canada the 51st state and all that kind of stuff, and taking Greenland, buying Greenland from the Dutch. I think it has more to do, they try to frame it as a national security issue, that we need that area to protect, to protect our nations from the Chinese and the Russians. But is that really the reason? Is that just them using that as a reason to militarize that region? To put bases and stuff up there, and weapon systems, and to mine the minerals and the materials and stuff that is necessary for these advanced weapon systems. I don't know, but I think it all plays into it, and into this, this golden age is them trying to establish this 10 king system around the world where they got one supreme leader over them. And I don't know how, and I think it's going to be probably a religious, like theocracy kind of thing. And I don't know what place the Pope, what he plays in it, but he plays some kind of role in it. And it's just, again, it's a pattern, it's a repeat of the same thing. It's happened over and over again. I guarantee you, under Nimrod, he was looked up to as like a god, and the religious system, the state, and the religious system were all one. And the same like with Rome, it was sort of a theocracy kind of thing. Their god was Saturn or, Mithra. And eventually they made it so that and that's probably why the Jews and all hunkered down there in Jerusalem and stood up to the Romans, because they were trying to make them worship their gods or whatever, and and take their mark, and and so they refused, and of course the Romans gathered up legions and legions and sent against them. And we don't know to what level their even the Jews' technology was. I mean, the Romans. I mean, we know they were pretty advanced, but and this has been this cyclical kind of thing. And what happens is, like I said there at the beginning, is that we just kind of forget what happened. What really happened, and of course when the reset happened there in the 1770s, or maybe a little earlier or whatever, the mud, this mud flood, or that kind of reset everything. Anybody that did have memories of it, they that wouldn't go along and keep their mouth shut, they got rid of them. They killed them, or either they put them in these insane asylums and said they were insane, took their kids and put them in these orphanages and indoctrinated them. Brainwashed them or whatever, and then took and put them on these orphan trains and sent them all over to repopulate everything. I mean, they, and then I think about that thing I seen about the vision of George Washington. He saw these three great dark periods in history. One was the Revolution that he was in. The other one was the Civil War, and then there was going to be one final one. And that this entity, this green skin, that dressed like a Native American, but they had green skin or whatever, and it was a female, and she showed him a map of the United States, and raindrops come down and was hitting everywhere there was a city at. And then you hear the wording everywhere they founded. And the word founded means found. I found it. That's what founded means. And so, they found all of these cities already here. St. Louis, Minneapolis, Chicago, Cincinnati, Denver, Salt Lake City, and others. I mean, Austin, Dallas, Houston. I mean, these places were already there. They just would, needed to be repopulated because, I guess during that reset or whatever, and all the true believers, the ones that had been converted, and the disciples and all them, they were in that holy city. They left and they gone to where, I guess to the North Pole. That's where they already were. I think that's where they already were. But they were some, that were out ruling over all the nations. And then whenever this period comes, and they were taken, or they transported themselves or whatever, to that holy city, and that's where they've been. And I think they still, are working in the world. I don't think that they just completely abandoned the world, that Yahushua abandoned. I think that there's people that they're out here now going around, but they just look like regular people. They don't, that's the reason too, that it talks about how you treat strangers, because you never know when you're entertaining an angel unaware. They appear just like human beings, and so they are observing. They go around observing what's going on, and they interact with people. They probably sometimes they protect people from evil, and from somebody trying to kill them or hurt them in some way, because they have a purpose for them. So we have to look at it that way. I mean, whenever we, meet people, greet people, whatever, treat them, decent. Because we don't know that we're not entertaining, a Malahim or one of these, Dakota Sheen. We don't, and so I just want to try to get people to, be aware of these things, and to, question the narrative, question everything, because I really have become convinced that everything that we've ever been told has been a lie. And then that religion is man-made construct, and it is not anything to do with this. It's not anything to do with this. That was what he was condemning those Pharisees and scribes over, was their religion. That it had not been made to be a religion. That they had not been established as a people of Elohim to be a religion. They had been established as a people to set an example of the ways of Elohim. And, they just failed in that mission. Their calling, they failed. And so he, the killing of his son was the last straw. He said, I'm done with you. I'm done. You're done. But it fulfilled his plan. I mean, they were a part of it. They were a part of the fulfilling of his plan for the redemption of mankind. And we're in the last phase of it. And it's the last shaking up and sorting out. And, just like I was talking about there in the second book of Esdras, that's what he's telling them in there. He says, well, I couldn't very well put everybody that's ever going to live, it could be hundreds of billions of people, we don't know, on the earth at one time, and, let it all play out now and be done with it. No, it's been a series of these repetitious events that are going to culminate in the final one, that is the final sorting out, and then that's going to be the end of it. That'll be the end, and the end of humanity, as we've been. I mean, we will either be converted and given eternal life, or we will be destroyed. And that'll be the end of it. The end of this age, or this current world. Not just the end of the age, but the end of this current world. It'll be remade. It's not that this world, or this, the system that we're in is going to be destroyed. It's the earth itself will be remade. And but the base, the foundation, and the structure and all that stuff won't. I mean, it'll still, it'll be reused. It's just new, the earth will be remade back into the way it was at the beginning of this world that we're in now. I don't know how many there's been, but there's been, multiple earths, multiple worlds here before us. And because Genesis 1:26 kind of confirms that. He says, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And you can look up the definition of replenish. It means to replace something that was gone. Something that's been used up, or that was destroyed. Okay, well, I had a phone call come in there. But anyway, I'm done anyhow. Just kind of something to think about. And I'm going to get off of here, because I'm still this is all stuff that's just been a kind of an epiphany or whatever, that I woke up to, that because I've said it before, I grew up in the dispensational Protestant Christianity religion, and so this is all a big change for me. So I'm oh, doggone it, what is that now? Yeah, some other phone call there from somebody. I don't know who that was, but anyway, I'm gonna get off of here. I hope all of you been blessed. I hope you'll have a blessed week. That you will investigate these things, search them out for yourself, and because we're living in a great time of deception, and we all got to do our own soul searching, and try to find the answers and the truth. And so, like I say, this has been a paradigm shift for me, and from what I've been believing all my life. I had to take this phone down because of that call coming in, and it's got me looking off. But anyway, I love you folks. I hope you'll be blessed, and really study and seek it out. Seek out the truth, and see what you come to here, because I believe we're really coming towards the final countdown or whatever. And so with that, again, I love you. I hope you all be blessed, and I'll see you again on the next Shabbat if Yahuwah is willing.